So with that, I wanted to introduce the speakers for today. So Kristian and Danny are at Autodesk. They lead the technical training program there. And as I mentioned, I met Danny many years ago when Jenny started TechLearn. So we would basically once a month informally get together at one of our offices and just informally share best practices. And so whoever is hosting the event got to sort of pick the topic for discussion. And that's kind of how we started this informally, which eventually grew into what it is now as TechKnowCon. So Danny and I go way back, and then Kristian, I keep running into Kristian, I think at local San Francisco learning and development meetups and events like that. So it's been great to get to know you as well. So I'm super excited about today's talk, which is going to be about how to apply group mentoring to technical development, leadership development, etc. So with that, I'll stop sharing and pass it on to you two.
1 second to share, make sure I'm sharing everything. Okay, thank you very much for that, Marco. Yeah, we're excited to present this to you. It's we chose this very dramatic title for an internal conference we were doing inside Autodesk, get people to come and watch us. But in my experience as a training and development person, it's an exciting little thing that we did, not very complicated, but it had great impact. First of all, let me introduce myself and Kristian. So I'm Danny, I use he, him. I worked as an electrical engineer for 20 years. I've been in corporate training for 16 years. The last 3 years, I've been teaching at a local university on leadership, and I've been at Autodesk 8 years.
And my name is Kristian Ruggieri. My pronouns are she, her. The thing I've done the longest is improvise. I'm an improviser performing on stage, and I also bring those transferable skills of staying present, open, and flexible into the workplace. I have been a program manager for the last 6 years after a career in human resources. In between those lives, I was a Segway tour guide for 7 years. Improv was very helpful in that. And I have been at Autodesk for 4 years.
Yeah, and Kristian and I met back in 1999 in a stand-up comedy class. So we have a connection through the performance world. Just tell you a little bit about who Autodesk is, just 2 quick slides in case you don't know. If you've ever looked up at a tall building across a bridge or seen an exciting movie with special effects, the chances are that you've encountered one of our products, but not as a user, as consuming the product that our customers do with our software. So we're in the business of helping people design, imagine, and create a better world, essentially. As a company, we've 12,000 plus employees, almost $4 billion revenue, and we have switched to a subscription model like most companies. Right now, about 5 million subscriptions. Our software is, of course, not household, so it tends to be used by specialists folks. So with that, let's talk about what we'll cover today. So we're going to talk about what we were trying to solve when we put this program together, what we actually did, what we ended up learning from that, and then some possibilities that have emerged from it. Okay, so okay, got a message that you can see my Zoom control. Let me move that off screen. There we go. Thanks. So we came up with a what if. What if you could put a program together that actually was effective at helping people develop skills? And in this case, we started off talking about management skills or leadership skills. What if you could create a psychologically safe bubble so people felt vulnerable enough to actually admit that they didn't know something and thereby jump in and help them learn it? What if you could give them the chance to create a vibrant, trusted network? And then what if you could actually somewhat cure them from imposter syndrome? These weren't things we actually started out with design in mind, but in fact, it's some of the feedback we get from the attendees of what it's done for them. So what we started off talking about was helping managers develop. And it was a kind of a nebulous ask. And as background to this, Autodesk as a company, not so heavily invested in manager training in the last few years. It was a kind of once-off kind of thing. So, people become managers because of what they were doing technically. And but we know that the manager job is tricky. You're essentially a multiplier. You've not only do you have to be a coach, you've got to be a if the company has a company culture, you're part of spreading that. People say you go to a company for a job, but you leave because of a manager. So manager has a huge impact on turnover. Those social emotional skills of eventually you have to sit in a room with one other person and you have to be able to listen actively, coach them, manage them, make sure that they're satisfied, and make sure the company gets what they need. So it's a lot of tricky behavior that we expect of a manager. And do you have a disposition to manage? The word disposition comes to me clearly if you think, the difference between the question, can you play the piano, and do you play the piano? So can you listen actively, and do you listen actively? So do you have a disposition to manage? Is this something that you actively put into practice? And then we ran into several times that several managers expressed, somewhere in the back of their head, they knew they weren't trained. They wondered were they doing it right, but everybody wants to appear like they are doing it right. So this is, definitely a tricky part about being a manager. And I think in technical management, maybe even more so. So in terms of developing the program, we know a few things. We wanted to avoid training as an event. You go to a presentation skills class and you come out feeling, emotionally connected with the material, but as the next day comes or the following week comes, that just fades out. So we know that training as an event is not all it's cut out to be. And we know that mastery actually comes from practice. So when you put something into practice, we also know that adults learn by reflection. So if you give adults the opportunity to have, have more practice or have reflection, turns out that the reflection actually does a more effective job of moving that knowledge into our long-term memory as we build our mind maps, our psychological maps of what this material means. And we also know that mentoring is a powerful intervention. And when we think about mastery as a practice, it also makes me think of coaching. You learn something, and then as you progress, you have somebody who can keep you afloat and keep you focused on actually putting it into practice. And that's my dog barking in the background. So we also know a few things. We know that dispositional learning really comes over time. It comes with practice over much time. But we also know that there's certain things that can accelerate acquiring learning. One is, boosting motivation by having it. My dog's being picked up by its walker, and there he goes. Okay. We know that boosting motivation can accelerate learning. So having something that's very motivational, like using a game or maybe using mentoring. We know that recurrent practice builds learning. We know that reflection. We know that giving people psychological safety allows them to learn by admitting what they don't know. And there's something called coactive vicarious learning. That's learning through observing other people learning. And also coaching, we know, is a very powerful accelerator for learning happening for adults. So these are the building blocks that we put into using these these effective development opportunities. We designed our system, and Kristian will talk about that.
Yeah, so as Danny mentioned, keeping all of that in mind, what we did was create a structure of mentor-led cohorts. So it started with a cohort of learners, and these were managers, and each cohort had a mentor. And the learning cycle for the cohort consisted of the cohort members consuming learning content, learning pathways, and I'll go into the topics a little bit later, but we had the cohort consuming learning materials, And then they took what they consumed, for example, career coaching, and applied that with their direct reports. So there was the consumption of materials, then the application and the discussion with the cohort. If you can advance, and it's that application and the discussion with the cohort and the mentor that really, as Danny mentioned, help people reflect, help people watch each other learn, and help solidify what was happening. Next slide, I'll take you through how that looks like, or what that looks like in a chronological fashion. It started by us picking topics, and these were topics geared towards management development and leadership development for these technical managers within Autodesk. After we selected the topics, we selected the mentors. We recruited people who were seasoned managers who we knew would be comfortable facilitating a group. And this has all been a bit organic. The number of mentors we got determined the number of cohorts that we were able to run simultaneously. Once we had the mentors, then it was time to recruit the learners. And we did that through several ways. We made announcements at an ongoing manager meeting that happened. We used Slack channels. Once this program got rolling, some of the information about it got spread word of mouth. We also put information sessions on people's calendar. When you see your calendar Outlook and someone's plopped a meeting in the middle of the day, that's what we did to help get the word out. And then the structure itself, once we had the topics, the mentors, the learners, it was a 4-week learning cycle that consisted of two-week sprints. And because the mentors were volunteers, we wanted to make sure that the commitment for them was minimal. So the mentors were asked to participate in 3 one-hour calls with the cohorts. There was a kickoff call in the beginning to introduce the group and to set expectations, a midpoint retro halfway through to check in, and then a final retro at the end. And in between those 3 structured calls, the learners were consuming the content and then applying it, discussing it, getting feedback, applying it again, and discussing it again. So the topics themselves were chosen from surveying managers to find out what was important to them. When we ran the pilot, we put together a pathway in Degreed that covered career coaching. And as we were working on this program, the learning and development team at Autodesk published a series of management pathways or learning pathways for managers. So we started using those for the topics. And you can see they are ranging on how do you manage your top performers and set goals. Also, how do you manage conflict and help improve performance with your direct reports. We not only did we survey the managers to find out what was important to them, we also timed the training with the management life cycle so that people could get information on how to set performance goals before it was time to have those conversations with their employees. And after we ran the pilot, we did a retro of our own and we got some feedback. And this is where we learned that it was not working as smoothly as it could. The first and biggest feedback was that 4 weeks was not enough time. It was time for people to consume the content, but if they were going to apply it, get feedback, and then try again, 4 weeks was really too short. So we've expanded the program to be 2 3-week sprints for a total of 6 weeks to give more people time to practice what they learn. We also in the beginning tried to do a little bit of matchmaking and mix up the cohort so that people were meeting managers from different geographies, which is great for meeting new people, but it made it very difficult to schedule meetings where everyone could attend. So we've limited the time zones that we'll put together in a cohort to make meeting scheduling easier. We also had a group of 2, which we thought might be fine. Turned out it was a little too small, so now we make sure that each cohort has a minimum of 3 learners in it. And then there was just some confusion around some of the responsibilities. Who was supposed to be setting up the meetings? So we updated the playbook to make sure that the responsibilities between mentors versus learners was more clear. The revised structure then essentially stayed the same with the selection of topic, mentors, and learners, but we did make those adjustments to the time zones, clarified the playbook, and then extended the learning cycle from a total of 4 weeks to a total of 6. And how has it been since we have made those adjustments? I kick it back to Danny.
Yeah, so we could explain to you what happened, which we'll comment on in a minute, but we put this like 5-minute reel together of some quotes from some of the mentors and learners who attended the training. So let's hear it from them in their own words.
This was different. It was very, very effective for a relatively modest investment in time. This approach of a bit of formal quality, good training and quality time sharing with other managers really works. It really does work. Finding out other managers have the exact same problem, and it's not just me, it's actually a shared issue, which takes away some of the kind of embarrassment, like, am I not good enough to be a manager?
The traditional training I had many, many years ago was a one-day class, and that was it. And while there were some things that were nice about that, it was also easy to forget. And I liked this structure instead, where it was maybe a cohort of 4 or 5 peers, sort of a circle of trust where we could have conversations about actually what management challenges we were having and what successes we were having. And I liked the fact that it was spread over several weeks. People shared their nervousness about those kind of discussions, things that were hard, things that were easy. So there were sort of tips and tricks that were exchanged, which was great.
Maybe what the challenge that you have right now, it's the challenge that other managers already went through, and they have already like a solution or like a different approach that you haven't taken. You create this like relationships for the rest of your staying here in Autodesk. Another thing that it has helped me, it's also because I'm coming from a different country, and the network has helped me as well to understand like different cultural differences and different approaches. So how I think versus how other people from other cultures think. So that's really helpful for me as well.
As being a manager for only the past 2.5 years, imposter syndrome is definitely something that hits me every now and then, because all the problems that you see as a manager, for a significant portion of the time, you're mostly dealing with them yourself. So I think just being with a group of people and hearing them talk about their experiences and how they probably align very well with your own is just something that's super eye-opening. And then on top of that, you can not only hear that they've dealt with those same problems, but also get some insight on how just being able to learn from them, right? Because you've probably handled those problems or situations yourself a certain way, and it's just nice to see what other people have done. From the mentor's perspective, they're not trying to drive a specific agenda, so they're really there to help facilitate the conversations and help people learn from each other more than trying to teach everything themselves.
Each of us, no matter where we are in the organization, are going through similar things, and these sessions offer a very safe and a rich opportunity to have conversations that aren't always easy, but there's a deep level of respect and trust. And at the end, all of us realize, wow, we're all in this together, and many of us are experiencing the same things. It's been very interesting to be leading the sessions as opposed to being a participant. I see what hard work it is and what preparation it takes. And so I've really gained even more respect for the people who have led the sessions I've been in the past. I'd say it's been very humbling and very rewarding so far. I am really impressed by the enthusiasm of the group that I'm in. And I find it, I think it's exciting to know how all of us, despite where we're working in the organization, are really experiencing things that are very similar. So there's this shared camaraderie that's happening and a deep sense of trust and respect. And it makes me very proud to have an opportunity like this at Autodesk, and also to be able to participate in a program like this.
So I would really recommend to attend this and connect with people and just share your experiences and different points of view.
I would recommend this program to people because it's just a great way to get to know other managers at Autodesk, because you probably know all their names, but you might not have gotten a chance to meet them.
It was some of the most effective, no, it is the most effective training I've had in a very long time, which is why I've done 3 of them. And, I'm going to keep doing this.
Cool. So that's in the words of the mentors and learners. One thing that I think happened here was we actually were pretty humbled by the kind of feedback we started to hear. When we launched this, it was, not held together with strong bonds. It was a good framework, and it seemed to self-generate. It seemed that people got motivated when they got connected. So it was really interesting. So some of the lessons that we learned here is this: you're not alone. So when people are dealing with complex issues, there are other people dealing with it. And we also saw that psychological safety that a couple of people talked about really helped people grow. One of the managers who spoke there early on, had been 20 years a manager, and then he was in a cohort and he's learning from other people how to do certain things he'd been doing a certain way for a long time. So there was a real generous kind of atmosphere that got created. And we found that although we gave them pretty good content, the content was, an hour and a half, 2 hours of materials, that the conversations that people were having were way more important than the content. And that whole, extra bit and that feeling of imposter syndrome can be vaporized when people feel safe with each other and can talk. And just to give you some other comments on this. So when we started this, as Kristian mentioned, the L&OD team from the HR organization had released some learning pathways for managers to consume on their own. But putting it inside this envelope with a set of peers that kind of kept people motivated, with a mentor that actually provided a little amount of accountability pressure, it really took off. And by the end of the second pilot, we had expanded the invitees from not just the organization that Kristian and I are in, but a broader part of the division. And then since then, 2 other divisions have wanted to be part of it. One division is sending in some people to our next cohort, and they want to clone it, which, absolutely we want to support them in doing that. The other thing we learned was that the structure could be used for other purposes. So one thing I'm experimenting with right now is around psychological safety in diversity and belonging situations. So I have the hypothesis that a lot of well-meaning people are a bit afraid of saying the wrong thing in diversity situations. And so we've attempted to bring people together in small groups. Like last week, we had a group look at a paper on gender identity. And then we brought in somebody who was a trans person and some other people from the Pride Network to answer questions of the small group. And they got to ask things they wouldn't normally ask, or they would have been afraid to ask. And we were able to convey that in a sensible way. And we also think this could be applied to technical learning. We have a learning pathway around machine learning and artificial intelligence. And we think some of the senior managers may like to go through that with the support of an experienced person like a mentor to them, so it's not just left on their own. So we see a lot of applications for that, and we'll be excited to talk to you about that today.
And in that spirit of what else is possible, we wanted to we wanted to continue that discussion with this group. And so we have these questions that we would like to bring into the breakout rooms about how can we move away from training as an event for those soft skills and power skills, and as Danny mentioned, also for the technical skills. How might we leverage mentoring to develop mastery in different areas? And how can those small groups be deployed to increase psychological safety? Danny just gave the example in the conversation around gender identity. What else is possible? That's what we'd like to discuss.
Yeah, and that's what we have as a canned presentation. We're happy to take questions, or we'll hand it back to Marco and Moni.
Thank you. Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Kristian. This was super insightful. I wrote down the power of small groups and also how to deploy sort of like a true blended learning experience, right? So going beyond just like here's a piece of content, or here's like a content track, or just mentorship. You're sort of like created this experience that kind of blends across multiple modalities into something that delivers results. So simple yet powerful. So that's what really resonated with me. I love that. Cool. So any questions before we jump into a breakout room? Any questions or comments? You can type them into the chat, or if you want to raise you just speak up, you can do that as well. We just need to figure out how much volume we have. What would you like to ask from Kristian and Danny?
One thing we did learn is that the power of networking. We had people who, had been in the organization a long time, got connected, and we even, we ran out of mentors in Asia. So we had people that wanted other mentors. So we did a lot of cross-pollination and matchmaking. So we're actually happy to spread this into other divisions because we get more networking going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, by the way, one thing I was also going to add, I love that testimonial reel that you did. I'm sure it also helps in selling up the value of the program, so to management. So that was very powerful. Cool. So Katie has a question. What are the most effective training resources for mentors cohorts? And I presumably it means, how do you get your mentors to be great mentors to lead this cohort?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the beginning, we chose experienced managers that we knew. As we added people that we didn't know, we did a little bit of training, pep talking, and we actually partnered them with mentors who'd been through the program, so they had some mentoring of mentors going on. Did you add anything to that, Kristian?
I would say yes to all of that. And Danny put together a playbook that had, for each of the 3 meetings we asked the mentors to run, that had suggested questions and a flow. So for people who were less comfortable facilitating or unsure of how it should run, they could take that playbook and go through the questions that he had laid out.
And we also offered to come to their first meeting. If, it's one thing to read a playbook, it's another to be in the play and not know what to do. So we would sometimes, if they wanted to sit in and then leave when they got to the part where they were going to get into some confidential dialogue that we didn't need to know about.
Got it. And that actually dovetails into Jasmine's question of how much effort did it take to create this, right? Presumably it's a team of 2 of you. What was the amount of work to get this off the ground?
So I'll have Kristian talk about, I think the actual operation of it is medium touch in the beginning. I think as we set this up, this was actually came to me. It's been a long time in my mind. As someone who's trained as a coach, I've always wanted to figure out, how do you bring this into something at scale? How do you support people as they continue applying what they're learning? So I've always wanted to do this. And actually the conceptualization, it was, as simple as that diagram. It was pretty simple to think about how those pieces would connect. But then to operationalize it, we had to have content. In the playbook itself, I think, went through several iterations as we realized that, everything I wrote down wasn't that clear. And then, Kristian, you want to talk about the operation?
Sure. Initially, with the pilots, there was a lot of, kind of, as I had mentioned, matchmaking about trying to get the right learners with the right mentors. And that, in some respects, worked, but for example, with the time zone differences, it didn't work. And that was very time consuming. So we moved to a at least in the signups, a more self-service situation where we put together a wiki page that listed the mentors and the topics the mentor were having. And then it was old school sign up sheet, sign up for your sports team, edit the wiki and fill it out. And then I would take a look at that to make sure we were discouraging people to join a cohort if you had a reporting relationship with the mentor. So I would just do some cleanup of that, but we made it more self-serve to sign up. And then there is some effort to make sure the groups get kicked off, to remind them of the timing, to send out a survey to get feedback and have retrospective with the mentor so we can make adjustments for the next batch of cohorts.
Got it. And Stuart has this question about how did you work with the higher management? Presumably, how did you get approval for this, especially since you're like tapping mentors on the shoulder and saying, hey, can you take X hours of your work, even though that it sounds like it was a lightweight ask from the mentors themselves. Was it straightforward to get approvals, or did it take some time to sell up?
Yeah, so I'd say a couple of things. Well, yeah, you're right. This was designed to have minimal use of the mentors. We figured that was not going to be attractive. Mm-hmm. So it really has 3 formal hours of contact. And we have some extra time for supporting the mentors at the beginning. And then some of the mentors just made themselves more available. It wasn't asked of them. In terms of permission, Autodesk is a funny place. People don't wait around for permission. A lot of people do their own thing. So we knew there wasn't anything coming as we needed it from our L&OD team at that point. It hadn't been a focus. They were regrouping and restructuring. So we just carried on, and we stayed in contact with them. We made sure they knew what we were doing. And so when we first heard their plans of what was coming next, we made sure we didn't go down that path. We left it open and we supported them. So it became very mutual. And now actually they think it's best in class, and they really have held it up as something that they want more people to do, but they can't currently support. So we're seeing how it grows organically.
Got it. There was Ben had a question about this. How did you arrive to or experiment about the group size, the small group size? And I'm curious. Ben is asking, why not 2 or 1? Why didn't that work? I'm curious why not, on the other side of the spectrum, why not bigger, right? Like if you kind of think about the perfect small group size, it's 7 ± 2. That's like the 2 pizza rule at Amazon, or the smallest unit in the Roman army, because that's what fits under a tent usually, right? So how did you come up with 3 to 5?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started off with this heuristic idea, just from my own experience as, how do you run a group where you expect people to be vulnerable? I think the more people you add, it becomes more, there's more fear in the air, and there's more, I teach a leadership class at Golden Gate University, and if I have 20 students, it's going to take me a few weeks to build trust. If I have less students, it takes shorter. So I think it was a heuristic. And then when we kicked it off and we just allowed 2 to happen, it was too small. Yeah.
And one of the reasons is, although everyone starts with the best intention to attend those 3 meetings, sometimes it can't happen. And if it got to just the mentor and 1 person, that's okay, but we have a mentorship program where people can have a mentor. One of the benefits of this was hearing from other managers who were your peers. So that's why having 2 was a little too small. And from the mentor's perspective, 5 is kind of been the max, because it's hard to manage those conversations in an hour when people have things to say or are excited to share.
And I don't know if I've got a Spanish class with a class of 5 mates, and then gone one-on-one Spanish training. And it's so intense. You can't escape from being the focus. So it's nice to be able to watch somebody else react and learn from them.
Got it. And Sarah had a question, any logistical issues with respect to scheduling all this and kind of aligning, especially mentors, making sure that that this is on their calendar and they show up and all that stuff, or was it fairly straightforward?
So we left it to the cohorts to self-organize. We put out a schedule and had target dates for those 3 meetings, but understanding that everyone's going to need to be a little flexible to accommodate the people in the group. And some of the feedback that we got is it depends. It's a little cohort by cohort. Some cohorts have a participant who's very on top of getting the group together and getting those meetings on the calendars. Other cohorts had a harder time rallying around that.
And sometimes the busier the mentor is, the more that they should be the scheduler, unfortunately, but that's somehow the way it goes.
I love that idea of like self-organizing, but giving them some kind of guardrails in the form of a playbook and telling them like, this is the best practices. Now go figure out what works for you.
Right.
And as soon as they got into conversation, it seemed to just self-drive itself, which, when you leave something go and you're not really sure what's going on, and then you sample it and you go like, oh, it's going fine. That was like a little bit of a surprise, actually. So very pleasant.
Very cool. Awesome. So with that, that was Kristian and Danny from Autodesk.